What is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Draft.com studios where myself and Kyle both coming to you today talking a little bit of buy low, sell high targets. Now, these are some guys who over the next few weeks you really want to have on your fantasy rosters. This may not be somebody rest of season, but to really solidify your playoff spot or get you back on track, that's what we're trying to accomplish here today. But don't forget, we appeal to people in all different types of leagues. Some of these names may not be players who are available in your league. They may be players that are untouchable in your league. But just remember, there's others out there that may not have that same issue, and we want to make sure we cover it for everybody. So with that being said, Kyle, you ready to talk some buys and sells?
100%.
100? You want to keep it 100?
Keeping 100.
No, not 100. 100.
Jake, I would like to keep it 100%, please.
Oh, okay, then. All right, then. Let's kick it off right away, Kyle. Let's get into some quarterbacks that we're going to be buying. And there's a couple, and some of them may be somewhat of a surprise. But first one up on the list, it's going to be Sam Darnold. And it's not just because he just had a great comeback week after his mononucleosis, which is always fun to say. But Sam Darnold's schedule coming up is absolutely crazy easy. And it's probably somebody you may be able to get off your waiver wire.
Absolutely. And if you can't get him off your waiver wire, if he is owned, you could probably wait until after this week because he's got New England this week and then he's got Jacksonville. But it's after that where things become very interesting for his schedule. Miami, the Giants, Washington, Oakland, Cincinnati, and Miami again. This is going to be a guy that is going to 100% put up maximum points every single week. He's, during that stretch, more than likely going to be a quarterback one, between 1 and 12, not a quarterback one every single week after he gets past New England and Jacksonville.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, fourth easiest strength of schedule going forward here, remainder of season. Next up, what about Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills? This is somebody who a lot of people were really high on in the preseason, and he's had some good showings here. But now may be the time to kind of scoop in there and get him if somebody's willing to part ways with him.
Yeah, if for some reason he's on your waiver wire, you got to add him right away. If somebody owns him, you would have to get him right now because he's got Miami this week, and then he's going to get Philadelphia, but then he's basically got Miami 2 times in the next 5 weeks. He will have a little bit of a rough schedule after that, Denver and Dallas, but over the next several weeks, he's a guy that through the air and on the ground is also going to put up a lot of points for you.
Yeah, and absolutely. And like we said, this is not rest of season. This is just mid-season here, trying to get you guys some mid-season wins. Josh Allen, great choice. Also, Teddy Bridgewater decided to throw the ball down the field a little bit this past week, and he's done enough to continue winning ball games in New Orleans, but his schedule coming up, another one of these guys we just can't ignore.
Between weeks 8 and 13, he's got 3 matchups against Arizona, Atlanta, and Atlanta again. So they're all in the top 3 of most points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. And then Tampa Bay is right in there at number 6 as well. So again, another quarterback to maximize points. And that's what you need to do right now. You need to maximize your points, especially if you're playing from behind. If you have a losing record right now, toss out all the safe plays, go high risk, put the guys who are going to get you the most points in your lineup every single time, even if they're riskier plays.
Yeah, because you got to make up that ground somehow. And
Yep.
You have a little bit of a theme going on here. I mean, we're seeing the same type of teams, Atlanta, Miami.
Yep.
A lot of these games that are coming up for a lot of these teams, that's where you want to put your players at because they haven't stopped anybody all week. They're not making any improvements. They're dealing with injuries. Great reasons to go after some of these names. So those were a few of our buy low candidates. Let's get into some sell candidates here. And the first one is going to piss off a fan base, but we've done it before, so who cares? They'll get over it. It's Carson Wentz. And a lot of people love Carson Wentz, and the Philadelphia Eagles fans are probably going to riot as soon as they hear this. But Carson Wentz right now has the 6th toughest remaining strength of schedule, and he's consistently dealing with injuries to his wide receivers. It doesn't seem like he ever has a full complement of wide receivers, and over his next 5 games, he plays 4 of the top 7 pass defenses plus a bye week. I'm a little bit worried about his mid-season schedule going forward after this middle part of the season. That could be a different story, though.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him in another video soon because we're going to do like a playoff matchups video so you can look well down the road to the end of the season. But yeah, when you have Dallas, Buffalo, Chicago, a bye, and then New England, that's scary to try and get through.
Yeah, that's not something you want to count on week in and week out, especially if you're trying to make up ground. Now, another one, and this one's going to pain both of us to even talk about, Kyle. This is kind of like benching one of your children, putting one of them in timeout. It's Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. Now we've loved Dak Prescott, and he's performed pretty well fantasy wise, which is all we really care about on a weekly basis here. But now I don't know if we're starting to get that warm fuzzy on the inside anymore for Dak Prescott.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. They're not playing well right now at all. Amari Cooper, who we'll talk about in a minute, is a little banged up right now as well. Zeke just hasn't been playing that well, mostly attributed to a banged up offensive line. So they've got a lot of things going wrong for them right now. And then when you throw on the top of it, he's got a bye in week 8. He does have the Giants within that. But then several teams in terms of lowest points allowed to quarterbacks, Minnesota, Detroit, New England, Buffalo, and Chicago, and back to back weeks. So he's definitely not a guy that's going to give you a ton of points during that stretch, especially with how they're playing right now.
Yeah, exactly. And you hit it right there with the offensive line. The loss of Lyle Collins and Tyron Smith. Sounds like Tyron Smith could come back this upcoming week, which is a big help. But, I mean, losing 2 all-pro offensive linemen is not going to help any quarterback whatsoever. I don't care who it is. So those were a few of a quarterback's buys and sells. Let's go into a few running backs now, Kyle, and see if we have a few options out there for people to buy and sell there for the running back position. All right, so for the start of the running back position, you're going to notice a little bit of a trend. I mean, we started off the show with Sam Darnold of the New York Jets. Why not just keep the whole Jets bandwagon going on? And Le'Veon Bell is going to be our first running back who we're going to be buying. Now, we've been talking about buying Le'Veon Bell low, Kyle, since like June. I feel like we've been talking about this forever, but now is the time. And we didn't dislike Le'Veon Bell this year. I mean, obviously it hurt with the loss of Sam Darnold earlier in the season, but the schedule to start the year has just been so horrific. And over the next few weeks, it's going to start to get easier, and the second half of the season is definitely somebody who you want to target. Right now, the second easiest remaining strength of schedule for Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to face New England this week. That's going to be a tough matchup. They're giving up the least amount of points to opposing running backs right now. But then you got Jacksonville. You've got Miami. That he's going to get Miami twice in weeks 9 and 14. Washington, the Giants, Cincinnati. I mean, this is with Sam Darnold coming back, especially the way they played this past week. Robbie Anderson, I mean, he had a big play. Jameson Crowder was targeted a lot. I mean, this is going to be a team that's going to be able to pass and run the ball. If they pass the ball more effectively and efficiently, that just is good things for Le'Veon Bell in both the run game and the pass game.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely somebody you need to have on your radar. Next up, maybe somewhat obvious because I think everybody wants this guy on their team. However, we are seeing a lot of questions about this player, a lot of, trade questions involving Saquon Barkley. Now, not a whole lot of people want to give up on Saquon Barkley, but there are some leagues out there that are worried how much longer before he comes back. Once he comes back, is he somebody worth having? Is it going to take a few weeks for him to get back up to speed? I mean, he's looked great. You see all these workout videos on Twitter. He's out there, playing around, jump cutting. I mean, he looks fine, but a lot of people are still a little bit worried. But Saquon Barkley, if you have the opportunity, definitely a guy to go buy.
Yeah, and the reason that I wanted to list him is because, again, like you said, we've seen a lot of trade being tagged on Twitter, asked here in the YouTube comments. If you've got, a fantasy owner that has Saquon Barkley and they're teetering on that 500 mark and they really need to win and they don't know when Barkley's going to be back, it sounds like it could end up being sooner rather than later. Check in with them. Just say, hey, what's going on? Him or her. Check in with them and say, hey, what's going on? Do you need some help at running back? I've got these players that I could offer. I mean, it never hurts to check in on a player. So see what you could get for him. He's got a nice schedule, especially in the playoffs. He's got Detroit, Dallas, New York, Chicago coming up. Chicago a little bit tougher. They're at 23. He does have a bye in there to get rested up a little bit again as well. So a good playoff schedule and a good schedule right now in the middle of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, if you can get a player of the caliber of Saquon Barkley, you do it. Next guy up, somebody who you were very adamant about adding to this list. You had to persuade me slightly, but we went ahead and went with it. We put Josh Jacobs as somebody who you need to go out there and try to buy right now also.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of teams with most points allowed to running backs, Green Bay, Los Angeles, the Chargers, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Jacksonville, Los Angeles Chargers again. So he's got plenty of good matchups coming. The usage part is what worries me. I mean, are they gonna establish the run? I know that's a term that a lot of people don't use, or don't like to use. But are they going to establish the run? Are they going to feed him the ball? If they feed him the ball, then absolutely he's going to have to get the volume and be effective with it, though. So that's one thing that concerns me. But again, you might be able to get him at a decent price.
Yeah, and the volume is definitely going to be there probably on the ground, where I think that he really limits that ceiling from a week to week basis is his lack of involvement in the passing game. They
Hmm.
really don't utilize him there at all. If that can happen, he's definitely somebody who has a huge ceiling week in and week out.
Yep.
Hopefully he can, last and not break down here later in the season with all these touches he could be getting. Last guy we're going to talk about is somebody who more than likely in some leagues he may be available on waivers. Otherwise, there's probably a lot of owners that are willing to kind of probably part ways with Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills. Now, this guy has not played for a few weeks, dealing with a hamstring injury, but in the games that he played, 2 double-digit performances in half-point PPR leagues, and he is by far the best running back in that backfield once he's healthy. And with the schedule coming up, Devin Singletary could be a nice add.
The one thing I'm going to say right now is that if you are in a league where Devin Singletary is owned, you go put in a trade offer for him right now because he gets Miami this week. And if he gets past Miami with a good game and he plays, again, I don't think we haven't heard anything yet on when he's going to be returning, right?
No,
It's
not yet.
been basically each week's been a little bit closer. So maybe he doesn't play this week. If he doesn't play this week, that's even better because then you can still get him at a really good price. He's going to get Philadelphia after that, then Washington, Cleveland, and Miami again. So a really nice schedule coming up for a guy that you can probably get at a really, really good price. You might even be able to get him as a chip and just say, hey, I need a little bit extra in this trade. Can you toss in Devin Singletary? And it might work.
Yeah, absolutely. And next thing you know, you could potentially have an RB2 just sitting there on your bench ready to go once he's back to health. All right. Now the time where we sell some people, Kyle. And it's really hard to sell running backs because if you have somebody who's performing, it's really hard to click that submit button or accept button on trades because you know that they've already been helping you out. But the first person we're talking about, it's going to be David Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals, which may shock a few people. However, weeks 8 through 12, he faces San Francisco twice, arguably the best run defense in football. Also has New Orleans, Tampa Bay, and a bye week. Those are all top 5 run defenses. Chase Edmonds has already started to be a little bit more effective in stealing some touchdowns. David Johnson has been producing just fine, but you may want to sell high right now.
Yeah. So in terms of points allowed to opposing running backs, 16.3, 11.2, 15.3, 11.2 again, and then the bye. So definitely a limited ceiling in him. And when you're giving up that low amount of points to opposing running backs, and that's kind of the ceiling you're looking at, you have to hope he gets a ton of volume in the passing game. And I don't know if I want to rely on that over the next several weeks, especially if I'm a team that's fighting and clawing for a playoff spot. I'd see if I can't get him moved and get somebody else in there that I can rely on a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if there's a good opportunity here, maybe if you have David Johnson to go make that offer for Le'Veon Bell.
Or Saquon Barkley. I mean,
Yeah.
you could throw in him and then somebody else for Saquon Barkley and maybe get them. So those are different trades to look at. And that's why I say it never hurts to ask because you never know what could happen.
Right, absolutely. All right, next up, and this was a little bit painful for me also because I'm still very pleased with the performances that I've gotten from one Devontae Freeman of the Atlanta Falcons. He's started to finally get involved in the passing game. He's coming off his best game of the season by far. He has that ceiling. He has that upside. He hasn't really shown it consistently all season long. He's a solid running back too, which is what you drafted him to be. But right now may be the best time to sell high on Devontae Freeman also.
Yeah, between weeks 10 and weeks 15, he's got 4 matchups where he's facing teams that give up less than 17 points per game to opposing running backs. So he's got really, really tough schedule coming up. Again, he's had a tough schedule to begin the year too. And we said basically after this week, he's going to be kind of in that RB 15 range is kind of what we saw in half PPR leagues. So, right now, especially coming off the week that he had this past week, it could be the right time to move him before his value starts to go back down into those tough matchups.
Yep, and I'm not going to absolutely just say we have to sell him. He's not one of those guys where I'm just saying, hey, go find somebody to get, ditch him off on, because he has been solid for what you drafted him as. More than likely, he was a third-round pick for a lot of people, so keep that in mind. Next up, it's going to be Carlos Hyde, another one of these guys who is getting close to 20 touches a week, coming off his best game of the season, and you can just look at the volume and use that as a selling point that, hey, this guy is somebody who's going to go out there, get you close to that 15 to 20 touches a week. Not too many running backs in football do that. He has this ceiling that we saw last week, and he's somebody else that we could possibly sell before the value takes a hit.
Yeah, he's got, between now and the end of the season, he's got 5 matchups against teams that are in the top 6 of least amount of points allowed to opposing running backs. He does have a nice matchup against Jacksonville, who's given up a lot, but he also has a bye as well. And the reason I want to talk about Carlos Hyde is because this is like the premier type name where if you're trying to get a deal done, and we mentioned it already, and you say, hey, you know what? You need a little bit extra in this deal. Maybe you say, hey, I'll give you Carlos Hyde. He's played well so far. He's been getting the volume there in Houston. Sell it as it's a passing offense, but it's helped to open up the run game as well, and that's helped him be really fit. I mean, sell it any way you can and basically say, hey, take Carlos Hyde for a little bit extra and see what you can get out of it and move him, because as we talked about in other episodes, we have not given up on Duke Johnson yet. Even though he has a tough schedule coming up, that could mean more volume for Duke Johnson in the passing game, who on a per touch basis has been one of the most elusive running backs in football per Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, he's definitely somebody who maybe not putting up huge consistent fantasy numbers, but when you actually look at the analytics of it, Duke Johnson's playing well. He's just not getting the touches. All right, The last guy, going to surprise a lot of people here also. A lot of people are going to be like, going, what are these guys talking about? But it's Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks, who's been playing absolutely great. Had some struggles with fumbles to start the season, but has really cured that going forward. The touchdown upside is there. He sees huge volume. Rashad Penny has been hurt. But Chris Carson is another guy who we have on this list that you may want to go out there and just kind of see what you can get for him, because you could get great value.
Yeah, so Baltimore, I mean, an iffy matchup. It could be tough. Atlanta should be a pretty decent matchup. But then Tampa Bay, San Francisco, a bye, Philadelphia, and Minnesota. All of those are really, really tough matchups for him. Again, he's had some of those fumbling issues. He's reestablished himself over the last couple of weeks. I mean, this is a guy that if you sell right now, this is when we talk about like the height of value, like selling people at their peak height or peak value, that's him right now, literally as we stand here in this moment. So if you're going to start taking a look, I mean, if I had Chris Carson, I would trade him for Le'Veon Bell straight up. If someone was willing to do that for me, I would go straight up with Le'Veon Bell if I could do that.
And depending on your league, that's a possibility, because people maybe just be getting fed up with Le'Veon Bell and they see the production with Chris Carson. So, like I said, every league is a little bit different. Some of this may work for a few of you, and it may not work at all. But it's just ideas to float out there, just to give you a way to kind of bolster your roster here mid-season. So now that we've gone through some running backs, now it's time. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. All right, so for the wide receiver position, we have a ton of names to talk about. It's a very deep position, so that's probably the reason we have so many names to go out there and try to focus and buy. The first one, it's actually a pair. It's the wide receivers of the Carolina Panthers, both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, the easiest remaining strength of schedule, and they have games coming up against Atlanta, New Orleans, Washington. I mean, these are some great matchups for these guys coming up. It's still unsure whether Cam Newton comes back anytime soon, but the schedule shows that these guys should have some big weeks coming up.
And honestly, I talked about this on, was it? Yeah, it was one of the quarterback shows last week. I don't remember which one. But Kyle Allen really hasn't gotten a ton of love in the fantasy circles because he really hasn't produced like great fantasy weeks. But in terms of just solid NFL play, just being a solid quarterback, he's done really well so far. So even if Cam Newton doesn't come back anytime soon, Kyle Allen's played more than well enough that down the stretch with this easy of a schedule, he's going to get the ball to these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely somebody who's serviceable in a fantasy aspect, especially to these two wide receivers. Next up, it's going to be T.Y. Hilton. Now, T.Y. Hilton's been banged up a little bit, had his bye week here. Hopefully he can get a little bit more healed. Been inconsistent at times, but still one of these guys that has that elite wide receiver one upside from week to week, and he's definitely somebody that you may be able to get a little bit cheaper right now.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got a nice matchup in week 7 against Houston. Then a tough matchup against Denver. So if you're going to move, maybe not moving right now, maybe the owner, but after that Denver game, that could be a time to move, especially he's been a little banged up at times this season. If he continues to be, that Denver game is tough for him. Then he's got a lot of middle of the road matchups the rest of the way until the playoffs. So it's definitely a guy that you can either try to move right now or move after that Denver game. I would not move after the Houston game, though. I would either try to do it now or wait till Denver.
Right. Gotcha. Next up, this is somewhat of obvious. I mean, obviously, if you can get one of these names on your team, you're going to try to. It's Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. We love both of these guys going forward here for the middle part of the season. Now, Julio Jones, obviously somebody who's going to be a little bit harder to go out there and get, but he's underperformed at times here over the past few weeks. And Calvin Ridley, who's somebody who's been really inconsistent, started off hot, got a little cooler, started to pick back up again. Great matchups coming up. Two guys you need to be targeting also.
Yeah, he's got some good matchups, two against New Orleans and two against Tampa Bay. That one might not matter unless you play in a week 17 championship match, which if you do, stop now, get your league to change that next year. But different debate for another time. But the thing is when you look at the schedule, he does not have any matchups, him or Ridley, against teams in the top 8 fewest allowed fantasy points to wide receiver. So yeah, he has some really good matchups, but he has a lot of middle of the road matchup. He doesn't have any tough matchups the rest of the way. Ridley will be a lot cheaper than Julio. Julio's coming off a big performance. Ridley was even able to find the end zone, so it might be a little bit tough right now. So maybe after that Seattle going into the bye, maybe if you catch a team that's like, man, I can't really deal with a bye this week. Maybe if you catch them at the right time, you can get Ridley at a discounted price. And maybe if you go to put a good enough package together for Julio, you can get him as well.
Yep, absolutely. Next up is going to be John Brown. Now, we already talked about Josh Allen when we were talking about quarterbacks, so it's only fitting that we include his top target being John Brown as somebody who's got some great matchups coming up and somebody you may be able to get a little bit cheaper also because the name value just isn't really there.
Yep, he's got Miami. Then he's got Philadelphia, who just gave up umpteen yards to Stephon Diggs. You've got Washington, you've got Miami again. So he's got some really good matchups. He's got a couple of bad matchups, Cleveland, Denver, Dallas, kind of situated around those, but that's all right. I mean, he's the type of guy that you'll put in as your like wide receiver 3. I mean, he was a guy that we talked about in our deep sleepers episode to begin the year, guys you pick up at the end of your drafts. So he's not going to be a guy that you have to start every single week, but when the matchups are really good, you will absolutely put him in the lineup.
Yep, 100% agree. Next up, going to be the duo now that we've already talked about Sam Darnold. We've talked about Le'Veon Bell. The schedule is just so great for the Jets. Two other names that you can maybe buy a little bit low. One of them maybe had their price raised this past week, but Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder are two names that, hey, may be available in some leagues that are out there watching this show right now, but the schedule is too much to ignore, and the upside is going to be there because Sam Darnold can get it down the field.
Yeah, Robbie Anderson or Jamison Crowder might be on your waiver at this point. Now, if they were probably picked up this week, but they've got New England this week, which is going to be an awful matchup for them, even though Dallas was supposed to be an awful matchup. And that didn't stop them at all. But New England's supposed to be a tough matchup for them. So, again, trying to move after this week, especially Le'Veon Bell, I'll move as quickly as I possibly can for. But for Darnold, for Crowder, for Robbie Anderson, I might wait. And then you get Miami, the Giants, Washington, Oakland, Cincinnati, and then Miami again. So plenty of opportunities there down the stretch.
Yep, absolutely. Next one up, somewhat obvious, but it's somebody else that in some leagues can be available depending on who you have to offer up. It's Michael Thomas. I think a lot of people were worried when Drew Brees went out. What is Michael Thomas going to be with Teddy Bridgewater? Well, he's been just fine. You know, the weekly upside may be limited at times, but the volume is just huge. Michael Thomas is still somebody who you want to go out there and target if somebody's willing to include him for another big name that you may have.
Yes. And here's the thing. So, again, moving at the right time, they've got the Chicago Bears in week 7. So that's going to be a tough matchup. I don't expect a very high ceiling there. Let that happen and then go get Michael Thomas directly after that. Because then you've got Arizona. You've got the bye, which you can use to your advantage. Again, when you're in these trade negotiations, say, hey, Michael Thomas has got a bye coming up too, just came off a bad matchup. Teddy Bridgewater hasn't been. And then you've got Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Carolina, and Atlanta. So really good matchups coming up down the stretch to help you get into the playoffs.
Yep, absolutely. And then the last set of buys that we have are the wide receivers of the Seattle Seahawks, both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is really starting to kind of get more involved in this offense. He's not just one big play, away from having a zero. He's starting to get a little bit more involved, a little bit more targets on a week-to-week basis, starting to look a little bit more polished as a receiver. We already know what Tyler Lockett is, but these are two guys that, if you can go out there and get, not a bad option.
Yeah, I mean, I got some questions on the waiver wire video about why I didn't include Luke Wilson, who's going to step in for Will Dissly at this point. But I don't think Luke Wilson is going to be anything more than maybe a streamer every once in a while. Maybe he finds the end zone. He's not going to command the type of volume that Will Dissly did. So some of those targets are going to have to move around. And yes, I think they move to the wide receiver 3s, whether it be a Jaron Brown, a David Moore, something like that. But DK Metcalf has an opportunity here to really solidify himself as a go-to option, at least a flex play down the stretch. And you've got Atlanta, you've got Tampa Bay, you've got Philadelphia coming up. In week 7, he's got Baltimore, which, against the past hasn't been great. So that could even be a really good matchup. So right now is the time to move on both of those guys.
Yep, absolutely. All right, now we move on to the sells. And this is where a few people go, you guys are nuts. However, the first one we're going to be talking about, it's Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, weeks 10 through 14, he has Minnesota, Detroit, New England, Buffalo, and Chicago, and he's kind of banged up right now. However, he's still a top 10 fantasy football wide receiver, and I'm sure there's teams in your leagues that are looking for some wide receiver help to get that true number one. This may be the time to sell on Amari Cooper.
The time to sell Amari Cooper, this is the time to think about selling Amari Cooper. The time to sell Amari Cooper is 3 weeks away. So let's get him healthy. You're not going to sell him this week. He's coming off a bad performance. He's banged up. People are going to lowball you as much as possible. But he's got Philadelphia, who, again, they just got torched by Kirk Cousins and Stephon Diggs. And Thielen had a good game as well. Then you've got the bye, and then you've got the New York Giants. And then after that, it gets interesting with Minnesota, Detroit, New England, Buffalo, Chicago. So after week 9 is when you sell Amari Cooper. That is when you go against, that's when you start sending out trade offers and you move him in a return for probably will be a large package because he will.
Whoa, Kyle just talking about, that's a little bit of too much information there, Kyle.
You move him for a large fantasy football package.
All right. Well,
I couldn't even hold it together to get through that sentence.
That's okay. As soon as you said it, I was like, I'm not mature enough for Kyle to say things like that.
Hashtag large packages.
That's right. All right. Next up, this one may be a difficult sell, but it's Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, the value has just tanked for Juju ever since Big Ben went out for the most part. Became big play dependent. And now he's not even really seeing huge volume. If you can find somebody, maybe you have a Steelers fan in your league, try to sell Juju if you can.
Yeah, and so they're going to be on a bye in week 7, okay? And then hopefully Mason Rudolph is out of the concussion protocol and back against Miami in week 8. So Miami, 7th most fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers right now. And you've got Indianapolis, you've got Los Angeles Rams, again, middle of the pack. But then Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Arizona, and then Buffalo when you get to the playoffs. So, again, timing is everything. Get through the bye, play him against Miami, then think about moving him afterwards. But like you said, Jake, you might not get a lot. You might not even get a lot then after coming off a big performance. Do not sell him low. Keep him if you're not going to get players that are going to absolutely help you down the stretch.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. All right, next up's another wide receiver that's coming off in a ridiculously huge game. He had pissed off everybody for the start of the season and then goes out and drops like 40 points. We're talking Stephon Diggs of the Minnesota Vikings. He kind of came out here this past week and just blew the pants off. I'm going to say the pants off. I was going to say socks, but that's not real enough. It was the pants off of people this week. A lot of people had him on their bench, but this is definitely a guy whose value is now creeping back up, because you can kind of use it as a selling point. Hey, we've seen what the ceiling is. It may not be consistent, but they're going to start getting him involved going forward, and that may not be the entire case.
I mean, if you're a part of Headliner Nation and you've watched our shows, you didn't have him on the bench because you specifically in your wide receiver video said, we are starting him.
Yeah.
And that paid off big. So, but maybe right now is the time to sell. Maybe you can get a decent package for him. A lot of people are probably going to be skeptical and say, no, probably not. Detroit this coming week could end up being a tough matchup. And then you get Washington, which will be a really nice matchup. That would be the time to really try and get it. If you can have great matchups against Philadelphia and Washington, and then maybe even Kansas City. Then he's got Dallas, Denver. He's got a late bye. A bye in week 12 is going to be difficult. Seattle, Detroit, the Chargers. So that's when you're gonna sell him. Is probably right around that Washington, Kansas City matchup.
Yep, absolutely. The best timing available right there. Last guy we have is a sell. Maybe a little bit of a surprise. It's Courtland Sutton, who's really solidified himself as the true number one maybe in Denver. Somewhat big chunk of yardage dependent. I mean, he's not the type of guy that's going to go out there and catch 10 balls for 125. He's going to get those big chunk of reception yardage. But coming up, I don't know if Courtland Sutton's somebody we really want to depend on.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to get Kansas City this week, which will, that always tends to be a good matchup, a little bit of back and forth, especially if they'll probably be playing from behind. And then you get Indianapolis, but then Cleveland, the bye, Minnesota, Buffalo, the Chargers. that's a really tough stretch as well. So again, maybe not selling him right now, but I'm going to sell him before that Cleveland matchup more than likely in week 9.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect time to get him sold. All right, so those were some wide receivers. Now let's move on to the wasteland that is the tight end position. All right, so the first tight end that we have up here as a buy is an obvious one, but you may be able to trade some of these other guys we've talked about here earlier. And George Kittle is definitely somebody that you need to go out and try to get. Now, there's not going to be too many owners willing to part ways with George Kittle. However, if you can get him in a deal for some of these big name guys, now is the time to go grab George Kittle.
I mean, we talked about selling Amari Cooper, right? We're going to talk about a name that we're going to talk about selling here in a couple of minutes. So maybe you put together a package of Amari Cooper, the tight end that we're going to talk about selling, and somebody else for George Kittle. Maybe that's enough to make it work. It could possibly be. But George Kittle, again, after Washington this week, which should be good, he's got a tough matchup against Carolina, but then Arizona, Seattle, and Arizona. And Arizona is giving up teen points, or giving up teen points to opposing tight ends right now. It seems like every single week they're giving up the tight end one. So, I mean, that's the time to really try and get him is when we're selling some of these guys, put a package together, go get Kittle, bring him in, and you're going to have some excellent matchups to finish the year.
That's right. Bring somebody the best package you can. We're also going to be buying O.J. Howard, which sounds probably nuts. Nuts to a lot of people because O.J. Howard hasn't done jack crap. I think the best catch he's had all year was at a baseball game. Not that long ago. I saw a clip of him at a playoff game, and he made a foul ball catch. Best thing he's done all year. He's been horrible. A lot of people don't want him. Heck, he may be on waivers. If he is, now may be the time just to kind of scoop him up, keep him sitting there, because there's a chance that the second half of the year, he's way more involved than he was at the start.
So what I've liked about this video a lot is not only we're talking about the players, but we're talking about specific strategies as well. Here's another strategy for you with OJ Howard. He's got the bye this week. You're either going to be able to get him off waivers or get him super cheap on the bye. And then he gets Tennessee, Seattle, Arizona. Again, we've already talked about Arizona giving up so many points. All three of these teams, top 10, most points allowed to opposing tight ends. But if he can go off, I mean, if he's not going to perform against these three teams, he's not going to perform at all. But if he can go off against Tennessee, Seattle, and Arizona 3 straight weeks, then you flip him and you get him out and you go get yourself somebody else instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Now is the perfect time, and it's very low risk right now because you're not having to invest a whole lot. Also have as a buy, Vance McDonald is somebody who's been underwhelming, dealing with injuries and umpteen numerous quarterback issues there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But he's somebody who else is really super cheap right now. That may not be a bad strategy pick either right this second.
Yeah, between weeks 8 and 14, he has 5 matchups against teams in the top 10, allowing the most points to opposing tight ends. We talked about the quarterback situation there. We hope Mason Rudolph is back very soon. If he is, I think he's going to start looking Vance McDonald's way again. I mean, it's been injuries. It's been, some ineffectiveness, obviously quarterback issues. So he's not being looked at as very valuable by a lot of owners right now. He's either going to be on waivers or you're going to get him super cheap like OJ Howard. And those are the best kind of deals to make when you can get guys super cheap and potentially get a lot of value later on.
That's right. I like cheap, Kyle. I like cheap. All right, now on to the cheap one packages. Sell. All right, then. Cheap packages. All right. The one sell we have for the tight end. It's hard to really sell a lot of tight ends because there's not very many of them that are worth a crap.
Yes.
So the one that we're going to sell is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens, who has been arguably one of the better fantasy tight ends all season long. His ceiling is enormous. He's the number one target of Lamar Jackson on a weekly basis. Hollywood Brown's been banged up. It opens the door for a lot of Mark Andrews, but kind of like we mentioned with Kittle, Mark Andrews may be a name that you can involve in a trade with another piece and then go out and get George Kittle and put yourself in a lot better position going forward.
Yep, and the time to sell Mark Andrews is going to be after this week. They've got Seattle, 7th most points allowed. Then he's got the bye. But then after that, he has got 5 matchups between weeks 9 and 15 with teams that are allowing within the 6 to 8 range of least amount of points allowed to opposing tight ends. So really tough matchups moving forward. I've liked Mark Andrews all season long. He's served his purpose at this point. But just based on the players we've had so far, maybe you say, hey, Mark Andrews, Amari Cooper, and Chris Carson all sells for us for George Kittle and Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, That's a realistic trade to go out there
Hmm.
and get. And it's really setting you up here for the next few weeks, even though it sounds like you're giving up a lot. When you put everything into perspective,
Yes.
that is a very doable trade. So we just went through a lot of names from each position, and I'm sure you have questions. By all means, leave them down below in the comment section. We try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. Just a reminder, we are giving away some cold hard cash right now, Kyle. We're making it rain on somebody on Halloween, giving away $1,000. There's a link to a video in the description. If you want to be entered to win $1,000, all you have to do is leave a comment on the video that's in the description. So go make sure you do that before the month is over. You don't want to miss out on your chance. Kyle wishes he could win it, but I've already told him he's not eligible.
You can't say that because it's going to make me sound fishy. I never asked to win it.
You never denied it either.
I just denied it.
That's right. Okay, you just denied. All right, he's off the hook. But hey, once again, really appreciate the support. Let us know if you have any questions. Make sure you hit that like button if you're new here. Hit the subscribe button. Also, let us know down below that you're new to Headliner Nation. We would love to welcome you guys here to the community. Once again, have a great rest of your week. Good luck this weekend. We'll talk to you guys later.